When sleep is abundant, minds flourish. When it's not, they don't.
We should be accessing as much uninterrupted deep sleep as we can.
Everything revolves around sleep. Nothing changes existence more than sleep.
It is never too late to start sleeping better.
We know that this chronic circadian disruption significantly increases risk of metabolic diseases.
The leading cause of death in late-stage adolescent teens is road traffic accidents, and here sleep matters enormously.
The thing that we are all a slave to, all of us, is the 24-hour circadian cycle.
I love the sleep data.
I started to look at the data. The data was immensely powerful.
Everything falls apart without sleep. I don't know how to communicate any better. There was this reporter that wrote an article recently for GQ. I was at this anti-aging conference, and this person who interviewed me said, what is the number one thing you do for, anti-aging? And this reporter, she told the story so people are there listening, what's Brian Johnson going to say about this thing? Is he going to say some peptide or, sauna or, whatever protocol? And then he says sleep. And she said, then the crowd just has this collective sigh of disappointment.
Right, because it's much sexier to talk about rapamycin.
Yeah. Whether that was true or not, but she was just everyone was so disappointed with my response. But, I don't know how to communicate more that everything revolves around sleep. Nothing changes existence more than sleep. You have more willpower, you have more zest for life, you have more energy. Yeah, everything falls apart without sleep. I don't know how to communicate any better.
Yeah, and when people want to hear you elaborate on that, the focus tends to be on the blackout curtains and the type of sheets and the air purifier that you have in the room and the temperature of the room. And those are all fine and well and important and play their part. But to really appreciate it, you have to actually embrace the entirety of the program.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I think we're all competing for status and power in society. In all of our own little circles and places. And there's so much mythology caught up in the hero being sleep deprived and sleeping under the desk and going days without sleeping. It's so built into the psychology that people are trying to signal to others, I'm worthy of being respected. I'm worthy of this status. I'm worthy of being admired. I'm worthy of this mythology. So they're doing things to play this script because they think it generates the respect of others. And in their mind, they may believe it too, this is how genius is achieved. I can think of so many examples of people who've done this. And so it's so deep in our psychology that sleep deprivation is somehow positive, that's what stops most people from adopting it.
That hustle porn culture and notion of sleep is in its twilight. I feel
I agree with that,
we've really gone a long way towards raising awareness around that. That's shifted a lot, even in the last couple of years, I think.
I concur. Yeah, just even when I talk to my friends, they'll come to me and say I want this so badly. We have to engage in a therapy session where I'm what's up? How's it going? And then we dig deep into their psychology and they uncover and unravel that they really are trying to be on mythology level with their levels of accomplishment. Now, it takes a lot of vulnerability for the person to be that honest. But once we do that in private and they're oh my God, this is totally unnecessary. I can achieve my objectives of ambition and status and power and wealth and success, and I don't have to do this sleep deprivation thing. And it's so liberating for them. They actually become better at their craft.
These circadian rhythms are primarily affected by two external cues in our environment. There's two things that can really throw them out of whack. One is light exposure. So if we're sitting up late at night in very, very, very bright lights, let's say it's 9 p.m., our body, and it's dark outside, our body, we might be sitting in LA, but our body thinks we're in Sydney. So we can cause some dysregulation of our circadian rhythms, and then that affects the release of melatonin, which has an effect on your sleep, for example. We can also dramatically affect these circadian rhythms through the timing in which we eat. That's the other really important signal here. So within this challenge, we have two different habits that speak to nurturing our circadian rhythms. One is light exposure. We want people in the morning to get outside, get at least 10 minutes of natural light exposure in the first couple of hours of waking up. That's important. That sets your clock.
Mm-hmm. This is the Huberman protocol around morning sunlight.
And then at nighttime, as the sun's going down, ideally you don't have to turn all the lights off in the house, but it will be helpful if you dim the lights down. And if you're using screens, you can adjust the brightness on those and put them into night mode. And then with regards to the timing of our food, there's some really interesting research that has come out of Courtney Peterson's lab. I interviewed her, looking at how efficiently is our body utilizing nutrients at different times of the day. And it seems that, particularly at nighttime, a couple of hours before we go to bed, we have changes in hormones that make things like glucose metabolism much less effective. It makes sense. Our body is getting ready to go to sleep, not to digest food and convert it into energy. The ideal kind of eating window, and some people have described this as a circadian biology eating window or circadian fasting. I don't think it's really a crazy fast, is you're in bed for 8 hours a night. That's what we said just before. And when you wake up, not eating for 1 or 2 hours upon waking. And before you go to bed, not eating for 1 or 2 hours.
Before you go to bed.
Now, let's say you do that as 2 hours. So you're in bed for 8. You don't eat for the first 2 hours of waking up. And then before you go to bed, you're not eating in the 2 hours leading up to bed. Automatically, that means your eating window is at 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The average person's eating window in America is 15 to 16 hours. So pretty much rolling out of bed, having a bite of a donut, and eating all the way up to going to sleep again. The reason why all of this is important is that we know that this chronic circadian disruption significantly increases risk of metabolic diseases, significantly increases risk of obesity, of cardiovascular disease. So there are repercussions if we're living in a way where our circadian rhythms are disrupted. And it's not just the long term. If you're experiencing chronic circadian disruption, you're likely to feel, more brain fog, more fatigue, lower energy or lethargy on a daily basis. So just getting some routine in place where we're in bed for 8 hours, we're thinking about light exposure, and then we're eating at a regular time, trying to avoid eating too close to waking up or going to bed, can make a very big difference.
This is like my Mount Everest because I get so hungry at night, man. It's very difficult for me to not eat in the 2 hours before I go to sleep. Like, that is my Achilles heel. So if I accomplish nothing other than figuring out how to master that as a result of doing this challenge, that would be a huge win for me.
Have you played around with the types of food that you're eating?
Yeah. And when I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor, it was very evident, like when I would eat, like right before going to bed, how it would wreak havoc on me. I would wake up in the middle of the night and stuff like that, and my blood glucose regulation is super dysregulated as a result of that. Like, I know I shouldn't do it, and this is a habit that's been very difficult for me to break.
I haven't seen this formally studied, so I can't speak to an intervention, but I have a hypothesis here, and I'm not sure whether you've tried this, but I'd be interested to see what happens if you have a slightly lower carbohydrate dinner and higher fat.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I suspect, because that will be slower to digest and metabolize, that you might feel fuller for longer.
It's a weird satiety thing, and I don't know if it's just mental or emotional, but if I don't feel full when I get into bed, like I feel like agitated. I feel like I need to, there's something emotional or physiological about, how you kind of relax when you've just eaten, like your anxiety and your stress level lowers. And for some reason, if I'm going to bed and I'm hungry, like it becomes very difficult for me to fall asleep.
I get that. You might need a bigger plate at dinner.
I eat plenty, trust me, dude. Anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but I think that's really important, and that's great. And if you want to be more rigorous about your sleep tracking, there's always, like a Whoop or something like that you can get listen, I never take this thing off, and it's really been helpful in keeping me on track. Not so much for the day-to-day, but more for the trends and just understanding the types of behaviors and habits that influence things like HRV and the amount of REM or deep sleep that I'm getting every night, and how that impacts resting heart rate, stress, like all those sorts of things. Like it's just information that arms you with the data points to kind of solve the arithmetic of what works for you and what's leading you astray.
Yeah, I love the sleep data, and I agree. I've been able to identify a few different kind of patterns. I've noticed if I'm working really late, then my restorative deep sleep is much lower. Mm-hmm. Probably going to bed thinking about all the things I need to do. And then if you
correlated that with where your stress levels are and how long it takes them to go down as you go to sleep. Because if you haven't reduced those before going to bed, you're going to have a less restful evening of sleep.
Yeah, my recovery today was 86%.
That's pretty good.
I was happy with that.
Yeah, right on.
One thing that's clear from the work on sleep that's now working its way into the naming and understanding of brain states in wakefulness is that one state precedes another. Now, your bike ride where you're listening to the audiobook is a way in which you're coordinating your respiration physiology, your breathing, and your motor output, your bike riding, with the ability to access auditory information and remember it well. So you figured out something about that state. But the neuroscientist in me says, okay, but what follows that state when you get back? What state are you in then? Is it a state of exhaustion that allows you to go into deep rest to access neuroplasticity? Or is it a state of where you've essentially moved all that excess autonomic arousal out of your body, and now finally you can sit down and just focus your cone of attention on your work? So one state precedes another. And one thing that I think can be incredibly useful to people would be to think about two hallmarks of brain states in order to access them more readily. One is that the thing that we are all a slave to, all of us, is the 24-hour circadian cycle. Every cell in our body has a 24-hour clock that runs at the level of genes and the level of cellular processes, and every network in our body, whether or not it's nervous system, spleen, whatever, is governed by this 24-hour clock. We can fairly crudely, but still accurately, subdivide that 24-hour period into three phases. What I would call phase one, and I'm just naming it phase one because we don't have a better name for it, is from about 0 until about 8 or 9 hours after you wake up. Phase two is from about 9 hours after you wake up until about 16 hours after you've woken up. And phase three would be from about 17 hours to 24 hours. The 17-hour to 24-hour period that we're calling phase three is sleep. And we know what we should be doing in that state. Mm-hmm. We should be accessing as much uninterrupted deep sleep as we can. And the beautiful work that Matt's done and others have done says, okay, lower the temperature in the room, elevate your feet a little bit, et cetera, keep it dark. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could talk about there. Phase one and phase two, we know based on really good neuroscience, have certain signature patterns of neurotransmitter release and autonomic arousal that lend themselves better to certain activities, both mental and physical, and not others. So phase one, for instance, is always accompanied by an increase in cortisol. And this is a healthy release of cortisol, a stress hormone that wakes us up. It's part of the wake-up system. And the release of epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline, and the molecule dopamine. It turns out epinephrine and dopamine actually manufactures epinephrine. They're biochemically. So that phase one of the day in many ways is ideal for any kind of linear action-oriented items. If you had, and people will differ. Some people say I do creative work best early in the day, but most people are going to do best at kind of correct answer type work, meaning where there is a correct linear output. It's going to be accounting type work, or it's going to be exercise where you might not know exactly what you're going to do, but there is a process that you can follow. It's going to be punching out a certain amount of words on a page because you're just trying to get the words down on the page for the book, or doing math, or doing any kind of linear operations during that first phase 1. Phase 2 has a signature pattern of neurotransmitter release in the brain and body that are more closely associated, not exclusively, but more closely associated with the release of things like serotonin. These are neuromodulators that tend to make us feel a little bit calmer, and they disrupt, or I should say they alter, because it's not a pathological shift, but they alter our perception of space and time in a way that allows us to make mental associations that are a little bit looser. They can be nonlinear. So that's a time that's excellent for creative work or for brainstorming. And you might notice that when you're a little bit fatigued, your mind is a little freer. And if you're very fatigued, your mind is all over the place. So one thing that I think has been missing from the brain state work has been a kind of cohesive framework. And yet I think every neuroscientist would agree that the 24-hour cycle really governs not just digestion and bodily temperature, because it does. Temperature is higher in the morning, rising to the afternoon, then starts coming down, and then you go into sleep in phase 3 because your body temperature is lowered. So those 3 phases really drive our brain states, and one precedes the other. This is the key thing. We can never look at a state in isolation. But if you wanted to understand, for instance, how to access a state of heightened creativity, you might try placing it in phase 2 of the day, so 10 to 16 hours after you've been awake, and see how that works for you. And pay attention to your state of mind before you attempt to go into that state, and as you exit that state. And so I think that if we've learned anything from the sleep science, it's that we can't look at one state of mind in isolation. We need to ask what preceded it and what follows it in order to understand its structure and how to access it better.
After hosting more than 900 episodes of this podcast, I have noticed a pattern. And that pattern is that the highest performers don't buy into the latest trendy hacks. Instead, they obsess on what actually works, which is always the unassuming basics. And there is nothing more basic than hydration, right? But here's the kicker. Your body can't hold on to water without the right minerals. Without them, water is just like this temporary visitor. But Element has cracked the code on this, which is why I've been using it religiously for years. 0 sugar, no artificial junk, just sodium, potassium, and magnesium in the ratios that actually work. Their new sample pack features their most popular flavors: citrus salt, raspberry salt, watermelon salt, that's my favorite, and orange salt. 8 stick packs total, perfect for finding your favorite or sharing with a friend. Get a free 8-count sample pack of Element's most popular drink mix flavors with any purchase at drinklmnt.com/richroll. Find your favorite Element flavor or share it with a friend. This episode is brought to you by Whoop, this thing right here. So I got to spend time with Will Ahmed, Whoop's founder and CEO, as well as dozens of key team members who pulled the curtain back to give me a rare behind-the-scenes look at what they do, how they do it, why they do it the way they do it, the culture, the intentionality behind the technology, the exciting innovations that are on Whoop's near horizon. And now the all-new Whoop is here, and the recent upgrades are dramatic. In addition to the sensor now being 7% smaller, the battery life now extends to a remarkable 14 days. And the new Whoop MG even boasts a heart rate screener with on-demand ECG readings, so you can monitor your heart anytime and share your results with your doctor. It's the only wearable that offers a complete view of your body, not just for tracking, but for insights that shape your decisions about your health, especially when recovery matters most. And you can join now at join.whoop.com/roll. That's join.whoop.com/roll.
The rates of suicide are far higher in young residents. And what we've discovered over the past maybe 10 years, and we've been doing a lot of this work too, is the intimate relationship between sleep and your mental health. And what we know is that when you are not getting sufficient sleep, your suicidal thoughts increase Suicidal planning increases, suicide attempts increase, and tragically, suicide completion also increases as well. And more generally, what we've discovered, and I've been doing this for about 20 years now, we have not been able to discover a single psychiatric condition in which sleep is normal. And so I think sleep has a profound story to tell in our understanding, our treatment, maybe even our prevention of grave mental illness.
Well, certainly in saying that, it should be the first stop on the kind of treatment protocol, right? Like, how is your sleep? Let's deal with that first before we look at pharmaceutical interventions.
Yeah, it's a stabilizing force. And we know it's a stabilizing force both in terms of your psychology, as we mentioned, impulsivity, but also just from a basic reward brain sensitivity, that your addiction potential from a brain perspective is higher with insufficient sleep. Same individual, 2 different sleep conditions, 2 different addictive profiles.
Right. Wow. I have to reassess my whole life now.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
Bad.
No, it's good. I want to talk about sleep in adolescents and in teens, because I think the work that you're doing here and the issues that you're trying to raise awareness around are super important. The implications of chronic sleep deprivation in young people, the relationship to early school hours, and how this plays out in terms of academic potential and the mental health implications that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so there's been a remarkable amount of work looking at this issue of early school start times, this incessant model of marching back the school clock hours. And the summary of the evidence, really, I think it goes the following. Firstly, we see that when you shift schools to a later school start time, so when you do a causal intervention, what happens? Firstly, academic grades increase, truancy rates decrease, psychological and psychiatric referrals also decrease. But what we also discovered is that the life expectancy of those students increased. And you may think, well, hang on a second, how does that work? Well, the leading cause of death in late-stage adolescent teens is actually not suicide. It's road traffic accidents. And here sleep matters enormously. And there was one good example, I think it came from Teton County in Wyoming. They shifted their school start times from around 7:30 in the morning to just before 9 o'clock in the morning. The only thing more remarkable than the extra hour of sleep that those kids reported getting was the drop in road traffic accidents. That following year, after the time switch, there was a 70% reduction in car crashes in students 16 to 18.
Statistically unbelievable.
It blows my mind. Now, statistically, you can give a relevance to that. Think of the advent of ABS systems in cars, anti-lock brake systems that stop your wheels from locking up under hard braking. That dropped accident rates by around 20 to 25%, and it was deemed a revolution. Yet here is a simple biological factor, giving our kids the sleep that they need, that will drop accident rates by up to 70%. So if our goal as educators truly is to educate and not risk lives in the process, then we are failing our children in a most spectacular manner with this incessant model of early school start times. When sleep is abundant, minds flourish. When it's not, they don't.
Right. There's so much education, I think, that needs to be done in this area. As a parent of 2 teens, I've got 4 kids, 2 older boys. Any parent knows how difficult it is to wake up a young adolescent in the morning and the frustration that comes with that. But what I've come to better understand by dint of your work is how crucial sleep is for that developing brain. And during COVID, we have one child, our younger child, who's being homeschooled right now. We've let her sleep in as long as she wants. And we don't start her first class until noon. And so she's getting a ton of sleep. But if you even tried to wake her up at 9 o'clock, I mean, just forget it. You're going to spend the next hour and a half trying to get this kid up. So clearly, there's a reason why that state of sleep is so deep, right? Like that it is crucial in this developing, mind.
Yeah, and we often have that classic idea of, a parent at the weekend pulling the sheets off, the teenager, ripping open the curtains and saying, you're wasting the day. Right. But firstly, what we know is that it's not their fault, because during that adolescent transition, there is a biological shift in their 24-hour rhythm that they now want to go to bed later and wake up later. Mm-hmm. So asking a teenager to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and operate and conduct themselves with good grace and be able to learn effectively is like asking an adult to wake up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning and be the best version of yourself. If I was to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and come through to the kitchen, or we were both awake, I'd have to say to my partner, I would say to her, look, darling, and she would say, like, why are you so moody? I'm just not the best version of myself because I've woken up too early, and she will definitely tell you that. But I think it's the same misgiving, because we don't understand how sleep works with our teenagers. And so putting them in the school at that time, 7 or 8 in the morning, essentially is, educating them amnesic.
Right.
They are, at that stage, they are leaky sieves, and what will go in will just come out the other side. So that's the first thing that's happening. It's not their fault. It's just their biology. And then second, at the weekend, they're trying to sleep off a debt that we've lumbered them with during the week because of these early school start times. And if you ask parents, if you sort of question parents of teenagers, what proportion of parents think that their teen is getting sufficient sleep? And more than 70% of them say, I think my teen is doing fine. I think they're getting the sleep that they need. When in reality, less than 15% of those teens are actually getting the sleep that they need. So there is a parent-to-child mismatch in sleep understanding. And as a consequence, there is a parent-to-child transmission of sleep neglect. Parents don't see it. They don't understand it. And so, in 15 or, 10 or 20 years' time, that teenager, lo and behold, seems to have amnesia. And they, with their own kids, will do the same thing. They'll pull the sheets off and say, you're wasting the day, because it was taught to them by their parents that sleep and getting the right timing of sleep and the right amount of sleep is something shameful.
So for that young person, do they need more hours?
They do. So,
so the 8-hour rule doesn't really apply.
No, that's for adults.
Yeah.
And in fact, the brain doesn't stop developing until it's about 25 years old. And sleep plays a critical role in what we call brain plasticity, which is modeling the brain. It plays a role early in life. In the first couple of years, sleep seems to actually help wire up the brain. So it's almost like sleep at that time of life comes in to a new neighborhood. And like an internet service provider, it wires all of those homes with high-speed fiber optic cables. But then later in life, that's when during the teenage years, we've actually realized which homes are using the high bandwidth and which homes aren't really sort of drawing on that sort of, that broadband speed. And so then the role of the brain, it goes from expanding and creating lots of connections, which is called neurogenesis, to then actually synaptic pruning, which is where we now have to make the brain efficient for adulthood. Should we be sleeping, though, differently than the way that we are in modernity? And I actually think there is an argument for this, because if you look at hunter-gatherer tribes whose way of life hasn't changed for thousands of years, they don't sleep the way that we do. They don't sleep in what we call a monophasic pattern, which is trying to get one long single bout at night and then we're awake for 16 hours. They sleep biphasically. So typically, depending on what season, be it winter versus summer, they will sleep for anywhere between sort of 6 to 7 hours at night. And then they will have this siesta-like behavior in the afternoon where they have a nap, getting this sort of fuller opportunity. So I think modernity, you could argue, has actually dislocated us from how our natural edict of sleep schedule. Is there any other evidence to support that? There actually is. Most people will know this. Somewhere between about 2 to 4 p.m. every day, you will have a drop, a pre-programmed and it's genetically hardwired drop in your alertness. It's sort of, that You're around the boardroom table after lunch, and all of a sudden you start to see these head bobs going on. It's not people listening to good music. They're just giving way to what we call the postprandial dip in alertness.
And it is decoupled on some level from the food coma, right? Like
Correct.
Part of it is, I ate a big lunch, but this is independent of that.
You can prevent people from having lunch, and they still have, and I put electrodes on their head. We can still measure this alertness drop. So it is independent of food.
Right.
Yeah.
So siesta.
So siesta, and you can ask, well, if that is how we were designed to sleep, is there any evidence that something goes wrong when you change that natural behavior? And that actually happened as an unfortunate natural experiment in Greece a couple of decades ago. They decided that they were going to do away with the siesta policy. So if you went to Greece, in the 1980s, and you walked around the towns, you would see on the shop windows, it would say open from 10 to 2 p.m., closed from 2 to 5 p.m., and then open from 5 to 10 p.m. Because there was a standardized siesta practice. They decided to do away with that. And so Harvard researchers said, okay, we're going to see what happens. What are the consequences? And they focused on cardiovascular disease. So they tracked the sleep and the cardiovascular health of well over 23,000 Greeks. And what they found is that across that 5-year period, there was a 37% increased likelihood of having a heart attack.
Wow.
In fact, it was worse in males. In males, there was a 60% increase in likelihood of having a heart attack. And what was happening, it seemed, if you looked at the data, is that they were still sleeping the same, maybe just 6 hours a night. And they were doing away with the nap during the day, and they weren't replacing that sleep time back into their night phase. They were staying true to what they'd been doing before at night, and they'd just been shortchanged of their sleep during the day. And that led to cardiovascular health consequences.
Wow. So if no siesta, you got to make sure you get the 8 hours. But if you're engaging in that hunter-gatherer practice, you can go 6 and 2 or whatever, and that seems to be fine.
I would say that there's probably a couple of caveats with naps, though. Naps are a double-edged sword. If you are struggling with sleep at night, the recommendation is do not nap during the day. Because what you want to do is build up all of that healthy sleepiness, and it's a chemical called adenosine. It's sleep pressure, essentially. And the longer that you've been awake, the more of that adenosine, the more of that sleep pressure builds up. And it's not a mechanical pressure in your brain, don't worry, it's a chemical pressure to sleep. And then after about 16 hours of being awake, there seems to be enough adenosine, enough sort of sleepiness to be weighing down on your shoulders that now you can fall asleep and then stay asleep. So if you're someone who has fragile sleep or insomnia, you shouldn't nap during the day, because taking a nap during the day will actually it's almost like a pressure valve on a steam cooker. You just release some of that healthy sleep pressure that's been building up. And now when it comes time to fall asleep or stay asleep at night, it's that much harder. So the advice would be, if you don't have sleep problems and you can nap regularly, then I would say naps are just fine. But if you can't do it regularly, and especially if you suffer from sleep problems, try to stay away from naps. If you are going to nap before 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Going later than that can be problematic for your sleep. It's a little bit like snacking before your main meal. It just takes the edge off your appetite. It's the same way with naps.
We are brought to you today by Roca, the best shades and prescription specs you're going to find, which is why you will always find me wearing them. This is the Hamilton, my preferred daily go-to. I've got them in like 4 colors. These are my everyday shades, the Torinos that I wear on the trail, on the bike. But that's just a taste. The main dish is their award-winning sport technology behind their fashionable frames. But while all their glasses may look normal, suited for any social situation, behind the scenes, they are built for performance. Super light, durable, they never slip, no matter how much you sweat, whether that is in the boardroom or in the pain cave. So for those who need it, Roca offers a full range of prescription eyewear, including prescription sunglasses, and they have a full optical lab at their headquarters in Austin, Texas. now is a great time to upgrade your glasses. So if you want to try them out for yourself, you can do that right now and unlock 20% off with the code RichRoll at Roka.com, or you can just click the link in the description. Unless you're new to the show, if so, welcome. You know that I've been plant-based for quite a while, about 17 years, in fact. And as an athlete, I can tell you that I know more than most when it comes to plant-based protein products. I've tried them all, and most of the products that are out there, let's face it, fall way short of the mark. Grainy textures, chalky taste, questionable ingredients, poor nutritional profiles, you name it. But I am here to cut through all of that confusion and make it easy for you with one word: momentous. Not just another plant-based protein powder, but the protein supplement to end the discussion. It's pea and rice protein that's sourced exclusively from the US and Canada. Clean ingredients, no unnecessary gums or fillers, just pure protein that actually tastes great. Every batch is NSF certified for sport, tested to rigorous standards. And what that means is that this is nutrition that professional athletes rely upon. So if you're ready to upgrade your protein game, head to livemomentous.com/richroll or use the code RichRoll at checkout for 35% off your first subscription. I'm sure you or somebody has studied what happens if you take exogenous adenosine, right? Like, wouldn't that seem to be the way in to resolving this problem for people that have insomnia?
Hard to get it across the blood-brain barrier, which is a protective layer around the brain. And, there's some issues around toxicity as well. So, that certainly would have been the idea. But what's lovely is that, you can increase sort of sleep pressure in a number of non-pharmacological ways, and exercise is a great demonstration of that. And I think, we can speak about all of these different over-the-counter medications that people try to invest in and think that that's going to give them a good night of sleep. But there are probably two really simple things that you can do non-medication that are, if you look at the data, are almost guaranteed to improve your sleep, which is some form of physical activity most days, or at least several days a week. And the second is deal with your anxiety. Anxiety is the principal cause of insomnia. It's not the only cause, but it's our current working model of insomnia, that people who have a high fight or flight activation of their nervous system, branch of the nervous system, they also have high levels of stress chemicals such as cortisol. And that seems to be very predictive of their insomnia. And if you can start to manage your anxiety, for example, meditation is a fantastic practice. And, before I was writing the book and I was sort of starting to research, I was a bit of a stupid, hard-nosed scientist. I just thought this meditation stuff was maybe a little bit woo-woo and sort of, kumbaya, and we all hold hands. And I started to look at the data. The data was immensely powerful and very robust, that people, when they are suffering from insomnia, if you put them into a meditation, a mindful practice, you can actually drop the severity of the insomnia in a way that medications, such even prescription medications, can't come close to.
Yeah, I mean, I just know, well, first of all, if I don't exercise, forget about it. Like, I know I'm gonna struggle with sleep.
Yeah, me too.
At night. And if and when I have difficulty falling asleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night, I've become very attuned to what my mind is doing, and it will generally default to some problem that I'm having or conflict that I'm trying to resolve, and I'll just loop some narrative. And that produces a tremendous amount of anxiety, which obviously prevents me from falling asleep. So I noticed that, and then I course correct through either some kind of mindfulness practice to kind of create space and push that narrative aside, or overcome it with a different narrative. And sometimes I'll just think about a book that I'm reading or a movie that I saw, and I'll just immerse myself in that narrative, and that's like a distraction.
Exactly.
That literally short circuits that other anxiety-producing narrative, and I fall asleep.
You're so right. So I think, in this modern day and age, sort of, the MTV, fast food, 24/7 society, we're constantly on sort of reception, particularly with now all of this digital technology, and rarely do we do reflection. And unfortunately, the one time when we do reflection is when our head hits the pillow. And that's the last time that you want to go into rumination. You know, you don't want the Rolodex of anxiety spinning up, which is what you were sort of, you know, describing, because that leads to something that we call catastrophization, that you start thinking, oh, what didn't I do today? And what do I need to do more of tomorrow? And then I forgot this. And at that point, you know, good sleep is not going to be invited into the brain. By the way, counting sheep does not work. There was a scientific study done by a colleague of mine at UC Berkeley that demonstrated, in fact, if anything, it hurts your sleep.
But if you're catastrophizing, it would probably be better to start counting sheep.
It could be, but what you described was actually what she found. Far better was to engage in some kind of a mental aspect. And what they found was take yourself on a walk. Think about a walk that you know in the forest or in nature or down on the beach. And just start to try to walk yourself through that, or think about, you know, a book that you're reading, or think about sort of a podcast and anything to get the mind off itself. So, for example, I feel embarrassed to say this, but I love racing cars, and so if I'm struggling with sleep, which I do too, you know, I am not immune to bad nights of sleep, and I've had bad bouts of insomnia.
It's so comforting to hear that.
You know, I'm just as fragile. And so what I'll do is, you know, I'll put myself and I'll think about the track, and I'll, you know, drive myself around the track. I know when I need to, which gear I need to be in, where my braking zones are. And then the next thing I know is I'm waking up in the morning and I just drifted off because I've taken my mind.
No, it's great. It's sort of a different version of what I do. What kind of cars do you race?
Oh gosh, I've raced all sorts, BMWs, Porsches, but my real love and the car that I own is a little Mazda Miata. When you're a professor, you can't really go racing in, you know, $500,000 cars, and I love it to pieces. It is a car unlike, you know, a Ferrari or a Porsche. When you're going 40 miles an hour, it feels like you're doing 100. Whereas in a Porsche, when you're doing 100, it feels like 40 miles an hour. Yeah. So I'm usually the slowest guy on track, but it brings me a lot of joy and satisfaction.
That's cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about best practices then. I feel like we're at that juncture. And I want to do this by walking you through the extreme lengths that I've gone to.
I know a little of your sleep history. Tent included.
Yeah, I sleep in a tent. Causes a lot of consternation and confusion from people that listen to this show. But I'll just provide a little background to that. Like, historically, I've had issues falling asleep. Part of it, and I'm interested in your take on this, is I think my sense is that it germinates somewhat from being like an extreme ultra endurance athlete. I've gone through periods of my life where I've put my body through just unbelievable rigor, like 25-hour training weeks where you're just so exhausted. Sleep is a non-issue. Sleep is not a problem when you're pushing yourself that hard. But it's been many years since I've been kind of habiting that space. And now, but I've acclimated, my physical body is acclimated to doing that, right? So now, if I go out for a 1-hour run or I go on a casual bike ride, it's not enough. Like, I'm not getting enough of the fatigue to create the restful state that I aspire to be in. Like, I have to exercise more than the average person, which is challenging when you're a busy person. So there's that. On top of that, my body's like a furnace. Like, I literally burn hot. And my wife likes the bedroom a lot warmer than I do. And we would have this back and forth over many years where, you know, it's too cold for her. I'm on top of all the covers. She's underneath them, shivering. It wasn't working. And as kind of a joke, I went, and we have a flat roof off of our bedroom. And I went and I just, you know, pulled a twin mattress up there and slept there one night. I had an unbelievable night of sleep. I thought, this is fantastic. It's nice and cold out, the desert air, even in the summer. And that, I graduated from that into getting a tent, and I've been sleeping in a tent ever since. I absolutely love it. The cold air, being under the stars, and being under a bunch of blankets, including a gravity blanket, which I'd love your thoughts on, which I found to be really helpful, speaking about the sympathetic nervous system and trying to calm myself down. An eye mask and nature sounds and, you know, magnesium, like all kinds of stuff. And The idea being, of course, to create the optimal situation for the best opportunity for 8 hours of sleep every night. And like yourself, I don't always, despite all of that, sleep still eludes me many nights. But more often than not, I'm getting more high quality sleep than I used to. But I'm interested in how this kind of measures up with what you found through your studies about best practices, specifically temperature, air quality, all these kinds of things. So
yeah, and so I think there are probably maybe 5 tips for better sleep tonight, if you sort of could suggest that, or trying to optimize your sleep. And temperature regularity, darkness, walk it out, and then alcohol and caffeine. And I'll save the last one because it usually, if you don't find me deeply unappealing right now, you will after that 5th one. Temperature is a fascinating one. We know that your brain and your body need to drop their core temperature by about 1 degree Celsius or about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit for you to fall asleep and then stay asleep across the night. And that's the reason that you'll always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot, because too cold is taking you in the right thermal direction for good sleep. And that's why sleeping in a tent, now we understand we're in Southern California, but nevertheless, it gets cooler at night than it is during the day.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing this in Boston.
Right, yeah.
It's still, typically it's low 40s and it goes down into the high 30s. And I've never not slept in the tent because it was too cold. I know that in your research, you found there is an inflection point, at which point perhaps, too cold is not so good.
Yeah, once you get into an extreme,
But I have to tell you, when it's 38 degrees, I'm happy. And I sleep pretty dang well.
Yeah, and that
I got a lot of blankets on.
Yeah, and so it's sort of the local temperature may not quite be that.
And here's the other thing: I always have my feet sticking out. I cannot have my feet under the covers.
Yeah, do you know why?
Yeah, I think I know, but go ahead.
Because it's your hands and your feet that are these incredible radiators of heat. Your hands and your feet are highly vascular. In other words, there is this crisscross of vessels very close to the surface, and it's very rich in its vascular nature, both your hands and your feet. And so at night, what the body wants to do is almost like a snake charmer, draw the heat out of the core of the body and evacuate it through the extremities. And the extremities in this case for us human beings are hands and feet as well as head. And that's why you will sometimes see rebellious, when you see kids and you kind of tuck them in all nicely and, you look at your wife and you smile and it's all beautiful. And then you go back in 2 hours later, just before, you go to bed, and these rebellious legs are dangling out, sticking out. It's because you're trying to evacuate the heat. So you're wise in doing that because they are wonderful thermal discharges. So that's temperature. And we do need to drop that temperature. It's different for different people, but I think the recommendation would probably be about, 65 degrees or so for most people. Now that's obviously averaging across men and women, and it's different there too, as you mentioned, which is around about, if I do my math correctly, it's probably around about 18.3 degrees Celsius. So that's temperature, and that's why I think you definitely will start to sleep better than you at least would do otherwise on a constant temperature. Because, there's another way that modernity has dislocated us from our natural edict of sleep, which is we set a thermostat of maybe 70 or 72 degrees throughout the day and the night. And that's not how we were sleeping. Now, if you go back to those hunter-gatherers, by the way, for whom you are in some ways mimicking their sleeping existence, they don't go to bed really on the basis of light, which is what we thought. They usually will go to bed about an hour and a half to 2 hours after sundown. And then when they wake up, and they don't have alarms, if you ask them about this idea of, artificially terminating sleep with an alarm, they're perplexed. Also, rates of insomnia in the general first world population is somewhere between 10 to 15%. In those hunter-gatherer tribes, it's less than 5%. So they're
also moving all day long.
They're moving all day long, and we can look at diet as well. But so what is determining their sleep onset and their sleep offset is not light, it's temperature. So and if you ask people, if you just bring them into the laboratory and you say, at what point do you feel sleepy at night? It's at the point where their core body temperature is on the steepest decline. Now, they don't know that, even though, unfortunately, we've placed a rectal probe inside of them, which is no fun for either the experimenter to insert or for the participant to receive. But they are on the awesome downslope of their thermal evacuation, and that's when they feel sleepy. And when those hunter-gatherer tribes wish to wake up is before dawn, just before dawn, but it's as the temperature starts to rise back up. So it turns out that we actually need to warm up a little bit to get cold. We need to bring the blood to the surface of the skin. That's why cold it must be in the bedroom, but you can wear socks if you want, or you can have a hot water bottle, but keep it cold, because warming the feet or sticking them out of the mattress will help your body evacuate the heat and plummet your core body temperature. And it's the reason, by the way, that hot baths and showers work for good sleep as well. I think many of us, even if we've got blackout curtains and sort of, we're wearing an eye mask, we will wake up, and I think we have some general sense, but maybe plus or minus an hour in terms of accuracy, that, okay, it's still probably the middle of the night, or it kind of feels like late in the morning. And in part, that's because you do have an internal 24-hour clock. But I also think that there's something that we've lost in terms of our light exposure that you have gained back, which is that it's not just that your internal clock, which may get you, within 1 hour plus or minus. It's not bad at doing that, but when you open up your eyes and you get additional exogenous information, which is from the outside world, rather than the endogenous clock time that your 24-hour clock is giving you, then you shift from plus or minus an hour of accuracy to maybe plus or minus 5 minutes, And so
it's fascinating.
I love this. It's something when I retire, maybe I'll look at this, because there's something very strange about sleep and time that is utterly paradoxical. And what I mean by this is, you can say, okay, I've got to wake up because I'm going to, I'm going to fly out and meet Matt Walker in Berkeley, and we're going to grab coffee, and I've got to get this early morning flight from LAX. And you set your alarm for, 5 o'clock in the morning, and guaranteed you will wake up at 4:58.
Right. 100%.
How is that possible?
It's crazy.
And it happens too frequently for it to be, just by chance. So somewhere your brain has this quartz-like precision of clock counting. However, there is an absence of time, particularly in dreaming, because all of us have probably had that experience that our alarm goes off and we were in this strange dream, and then we hit the snooze button, and our snooze button is just 2 minutes. And we go back and we go right back into the dream again. And then the snooze button goes off. And you think, no, hang on a second. That felt like almost an hour of an experience. So there is this temporal mismatch where when we go into the dream state, we can almost fold and compress time like a concertina.
Yeah, it's like Inception.
Yeah, and I think it's no big surprise that Nolan picked up on that, with the help of maybe some, sleep specialists offering that advice. We know that you get this, this dilation. I've called it sort of dream dilation or dream time dilation, where time is no longer time.
Right. Like, so what do you make of that? Like, what would be the evolutionary advantage of that?
Well, it may be that there is no necessarily evolutionary advantage, but there may be a brain mechanism that explains it. Because what we know is that memories are replayed during both deep sleep and REM sleep. Now, when we are in deep sleep, memories are actually sped up. The brain will actually be replaying those memories anywhere between 5 to 20 times faster. But when we go into dream sleep, the replay is actually much slower. Is there a potential long-term organic atrophy consequence of insufficient sleep on the brain? We seem to think that there is, yes. But again, I think I want to be really careful here, and I don't want to be causing people alarm. And what I would say is that it is never too late to start sleeping better. And that's not just me sort of pulling out the pom-poms and trying to be positive. We've got data. So in a series of studies, and we've done a lot of work in, as I mentioned, in older adults, but if you take a group of midlife adults who are suffering from untreated sleep apnea, heavy snoring, and then you put them on treatment, which is called a CPAP machine, CPAP, the continuous positive airway pressure. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this and they think that they suffer from sleep apnea or they have a partner who does, please go and get diagnosed. It is a deathly disease, untreated. And what they found is that about half of those participants complied to the treatment and about half didn't. And they tracked them over a 10-year period. And what they found is that those individuals who complied to the treatment and whose sleep was improved as a consequence, they staved off the onslaught of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline by anywhere between 10 to 15 years relative to those who remained untreated or uncompliant with their treatment. In other words, even in midlife, there is evidence to say it's never too late to start sleeping better.
But can those brain centers that have atrophied be regenerated, or is that a permanent thing?
We don't know. It depends on what extent of atrophy. We used to think maybe 30 years ago that the brain didn't produce new brain cells. Once it had matured and once you were an adult, that was your sort of smorgasbord of brain cells. And as you lost them through time,
that was
you
the whole
never
thing.
got them
When you
back.
drink, you kill brain cells. They never come back.
They never come back.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. There are, in many regions of the brain, that is true. But there are a couple of regions that it's not true. And in fact, these memory centers, the hippocampus, that's one of the centers that does actually seem to have some degree of regenerative capacity. You know, how capable of meeting the demand of brain atrophy and damage that system is of regeneration is unclear. What I should note, by the way, is that system of the creation of new brain cells, it's what we call neurogenesis, which I think is a great alternative name for a band rather than just Genesis, Phil. You know, if you deprive a rat of sleep, it fails to have the regulation of that neurogenesis. You lose the capacity for neurogenesis when you are underslept. So it becomes this self-fulfilling negative vicious cycle of prophecy that if you are not getting sufficient sleep, those brain cells start to deteriorate and atrophy. And then the one thing that could help you get them back is the one thing that you keep depriving yourself of. So you lose even the salvation of the sort of the salvaging, I should say, of that.
If you want to dive deeper into optimizing your sleep, check out my 2 favorite episodes on the topic right here. Click the screen to watch Dr. Matthew Walker break down the science of sleep and its impact on your brain. Or hear from Andrew Huberman on how light and routine can reset your circadian rhythm.